"You'll never understand the kind of life women like me actually dream about," she said during a beach vacation while ignoring me to flirt with another guy near the resort pool. I quietly changed my flight and left early. Nearly a year later, she accidentally saw my travel photos online while working double shifts at a downtown retail store. "You'll never understand the kind of life women like me actually dream about." She said it quietly, almost to herself, but loud enough that I heard every word. I was sitting 2 feet away from her, holding a drink I no longer wanted, staring at the side of her face, because she wasn't looking at me. She was looking across the resort pool at a man named Logan, who was laughing at something one of his friends had said, running a hand through his sun-bleached hair, completely unaware that my girlfriend of 3 years had just said something that split our relationship clean in half. She didn't say it to wound me. That was the part one kept turning over in my head later, on the plane, in the weeks after, in the quiet moments between everything that came next. She didn't say it to wound me because she wasn't thinking about me at all. I was furniture. Background. The person holding her bag while she mentally tried on a different life. I watched her touch her hair and smile at something Logan did from 30 feet away. I watched her lean forward slightly, the way she used to lean toward me in the early days when I'd say something that made her laugh. I watched all of it with the particular stillness of a man who has just understood something he cannot unknow. I didn't say anything back. Not because I had nothing to say. I had plenty. But something in me, something quiet and certain and completely outside the emotional chaos of that moment, decided that speaking wasn't the right response. If I had reacted the way she expected me to, this story would have ended very differently. There would have been a fight. Public, probably. Loud, definitely. She would have cried. I would have apologized for something I didn't do. We would have limped through the rest of the vacation in that particular Cold War silence that couples use to pretend nothing is broken when everything is. We might have stayed together another 6 months on inertia and guilt before it finally collapsed. Instead, I held my drink and said nothing, and the silence became a decision I didn't even fully realize I'd made yet. Within 24 hours, I would leave that resort alone. Within a year, she would wish she'd never said it. The thing about a moment like that is it doesn't just change the present. It reaches backward and rewrites the recent past. Suddenly, I'm looking at the last 3 days of this vacation, our anniversary vacation, the trip I'd spent 4 months planning and more money than I should have on, and I'm seeing it differently. Not through the generous filter of someone who loves his girlfriend and wants to believe the best. Through clearer eyes. The first morning, she'd been distracted at breakfast. I thought it was tiredness from travel. Then she brightened up considerably when we walked past the pool, and Logan, who was already there at 9 in the morning somehow, had called out some comment about the weather. She'd laughed. A real laugh. Not the polite laugh she'd been giving me most of the trip. The second afternoon, she disappeared for nearly 2 hours while I was napping. I woke up alone in the room, texted her, got back a vague "by the pool, come find me." When I did, she was at the swim-up bar talking to Logan and 2 other people from his group. She'd changed outfits. She introduced me as her boyfriend with the particular flatness of someone completing a bureaucratic task. That night at dinner, she'd been distant but careful. Kept her phone face down, which she never usually did. Answered questions about our trip with a kind of performative cheerfulness that didn't reach her eyes. I thought she was tired. I'd been patient. I'd been kind. What I realized now, was willing. Willing to ignore what I was seeing because I didn't want to believe it. Because we had 3 years together and shared plans and a future that I thought we were both building toward. We'd talked about moving in together properly. We'd been keeping separate apartments out of some mutual stubbornness neither of us had fully examined. We'd circled around marriage the way you circle around a decision you both secretly know is coming. I had a ring that wasn't purchased yet but was fully imagined, a mental shortlist of settings, a rough sense of when. That was what was on the table. That was what her gaze across the pool was casually setting on fire. I'm being uncharitable. He might have been exactly as successful as he implied. I didn't know him well enough to have an opinion. What I knew was that Savannah was fascinated by him, and that fascination was not the casual interest you have in a new person at a social gathering. It was focused, deliberate, a kind of study. The pool bar became the central stage for most of it. Tuesday afternoon, she'd wandered over there while I was reading, told me she was getting a refill, would be right back. 15 minutes later, I looked up, and she was perched on a bar stool next to Logan, deeply engaged in a conversation. I put my book down and watched for a moment. She touched her collarbone when she laughed. She slid into their orbit with unsettling ease. Within 10 minutes, she was laughing at something Logan said, her hand resting briefly on his forearm. Within 20, she was fully ensconced in the group, drink in hand, the sun hitting her face in that particular way that made her look exactly like someone living her best life. I was 10 feet away, invisible. A kid at the pool, maybe 7 years old, paddled past me with his floaty son, grinning at nothing. I smiled at him automatically. His mother called him back. I looked back at Savannah's group. Logan was looking at me, not hostile, appraising, the kind of look that contains a verdict already reached. "Hey, come over," Savannah called, waving vaguely in my direction, a gesture so performative it barely counted as an invitation. I walked over. "This is," she started, then paused for less than a second before she said my name, with the particular tone of someone identifying a piece of furniture they've decided doesn't match the room. Logan nodded. His friends nodded. The conversation resumed as though I had not arrived. I stood there for approximately 4 minutes. Then I said, "I'm going to head upstairs for a bit," and nobody said anything, and I left. That evening, before dinner, Logan's group organized an impromptu gathering at the outdoor bar. Savannah, naturally, wanted to go. We went together, though by now together was a fiction we were maintaining out of habit. I stood at the edge of a conversation about a specific ski resort in Switzerland that I'd never been to and had no real interest in. Logan was the center of it, recounting something that had happened there with the practiced cadence of a man who knows his stories land. Savannah was looking at him with open, unguarded attention. He made a joke. I've forgotten what it was. She laughed, genuine, full, the laugh that comes from somewhere real. And then she looked at him and said, "See, this is what I mean. Some people just know how to actually live." Nobody acknowledged me. I excused myself, got a glass of water from the far end of the bar, stood looking out at the ocean for a few minutes, thinking carefully. Later, back in our room, we stood on the balcony. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You take life too seriously, you know that?" "Maybe," I said. "Like, we're here." She gestured at the view, the dark water, the lit shoreline. "And you're just somewhere else in your head." I looked at her. "Where am I supposed to be?" She sighed. "That's kind of the problem." A pause. Then she said, very carefully, as if choosing each word, "Some people are actually going somewhere. And some people are just comfortable. And there's nothing wrong with comfortable. It's just not." She stopped herself. "Just not what?" I said. She looked away. "Nothing. Forget it." But I didn't forget it. I stood on that balcony for a long time after she went inside. I looked at the same ocean she'd been dismissing me with, and I felt something clarify inside me. Not anger. Something past anger. A cold, complete understanding. She didn't want me to fight back. She wanted a scene. She wanted proof that she had the power to destabilize me, because that proof would justify what she was already doing. The flirting, the comparisons, the public diminishment. She needed me to explode so she could point at the explosion and say, "See, that's why." So I gave her nothing. I went inside. I told her I was tired. I went to sleep. And in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I woke up at 5:47 in the morning. The room was still dark. Savannah was asleep on her side, facing away from me. I lay still for a moment, listening to her breathe, looking at the back of her head, thinking about 3 years. Then I got up. I didn't make noise. I moved through the room quietly, with the particular care of someone who has decided that this moment doesn't deserve drama. I packed only what I'd need for the journey, essentials. The rest I left organized in the suitcase for her to deal with. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was trying to be honest. And the honest thing was that there was nothing more to say that needed to be said in that room, to that sleeping face. I opened my airline app. I found an early morning flight back to New York. I paid the change fee without thinking about it. I confirmed the booking and held the phone in my hand for a moment, looking at the confirmation screen. Then I left. The resort lobby was cool and quiet at 6 in the morning. The woman at the front desk looked up with professional neutrality. I smiled at her. Outside, the air was soft and warm, and the sky was that specific shade of pre-dawn gray that makes the whole world feel suspended. I got in the waiting car. I looked back once at the resort building, at its lit windows and sleeping rooms, and the dark shape of the pool beyond the glass doors. Then I faced forward. The phone started around 9:30. She would have woken up, found the room empty, found the single sentence I'd left on the notepad on the desk. "I've headed back early. Take care of yourself." The first text, "Where are you?" Then, "Seriously, what is happening?" Then 3 missed calls. Then, This is incredibly dramatic, and I think we need to talk like adults. Then, later, from a number I recognized as her sister. Hey, Savannah asked me to reach out. She's really upset. Can you call her? I responded to none of it that day. The next day, I sent a single message. I think we both know this has run its course. I'm sorry. I wish you well. She called 3 times. Left 2 voicemails. Sent a long text that I read once and didn't respond to. She used words like blindsided and confused and didn't deserve this. And in a different version of myself, in a different moment of my life, those words would have worked on me. They would have made me feel guilty for the very act of leaving. I know this because they would have worked before. But I'd sat on that balcony. I'd heard what I'd heard. And I'd made my decision not in anger, but in clarity, which is a much harder thing to argue someone out of. Her last message, about a week later. I don't understand why you couldn't even have a conversation with me. I thought about that for a long time. She wanted a conversation. What she meant, I think, was that she wanted the chance to reframe what had happened, to position herself as the misunderstood one, to get me back in the dynamic where I was working to reassure her while she decided whether I was enough. She'd expected a battle. She got silence. And in the silence, we were over. The first month was hard in the way endings are always hard, which is to say not in a single dramatic way, but in hundreds of small, ordinary ones. The habit of reaching for your phone to send someone a stupid thing you saw. The reflex of thinking she'd like this place when you sit down at a restaurant. The particular quiet of an apartment that used to have another person's presence in it, even occasionally. I sat with it. I didn't rush past it. I'd moved into a 2-bedroom in Astoria the year before, a place we'd half planned she'd eventually move into with me. It was too much space for one person and exactly right for starting over. I rearranged the furniture. I bought a plant. I learned how to keep the plant alive, which is not as simple as it sounds. At work, I focused. I'm a senior UX designer at a mid-sized tech company. Not flashy, not the kind of thing that reads well at resort pool bars, but work I'm genuinely good at and increasingly recognized for. I took on a lead role in a product redesign that fall. Worked long hours. Got absorbed in problems that had clean solutions, which felt medicinal after months of sitting with a problem that didn't. Around month 3, I booked a flight to Italy. Not to prove anything. Not to perform recovery. I'd wanted to go for years and kept deferring it. Too busy, not the right time. Maybe we'd go together eventually. There was no longer a we, and no longer a reason to defer. So I booked a cheap apartment in Bologna for 10 days, told my manager I was taking PTO, and went. Bologna in February is not the Italy of postcards. It's gray and cold, and the streets are full of students, and the food is categorically, irrefutably better than you expect. I ate things slowly in small restaurants by myself. I walked until my feet ached. I took photos on my phone mostly to remember things, not to share them. I posted a few. They got a modest response. I didn't pay much attention to it. Portugal came next, in late spring. A friend from college, Marcus, was living in Lisbon for work, and I used it as an excuse to spend 2 weeks traveling through the country. Lisbon, the Alentejo, the coast up near Porto. Marcus and I hadn't spent real time together in years. And there's a specific kind of reconnection that happens when you're with someone who knew you before the version of yourself you're trying to reconstruct. You seem different, he said one night over wine on a Lisbon rooftop. Good different or bad different? He considered it. Just different. Less like you're bracing for something. I thought about that. Yeah, I said. Maybe. The travel photos kept accumulating, almost accidentally. Iceland in the fall. I joined a small group tour for a week. A thing I'd never have done in a previous version of my life, and found that I was perfectly comfortable being unknown to a group of strangers who had no context for who I was or had been. We hiked and saw the lights and sat in hot springs in temperatures that shouldn't permit it, and I slept better than I had in years. Japan the following winter. Patagonia after that. A proper hiking trip with equipment I borrowed from a coworker who'd done it twice before. My social media, which I'd barely maintained for years, started to become something real, a record, genuinely, of a life that was being constructed rather than described. I didn't think about Savannah often. Occasionally, in the margins of things, some comment a mutual friend made, some place we talked about visiting. I heard, in fragments, through the loose network of people we'd both known, that Logan had disappeared from her life fairly quickly after the vacation. Some complication with money. Something about other women. The specifics varied depending on who was telling it. I felt, each time I heard these things, approximately nothing. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Just a distant recognition, The way you register the weather in a city you no longer live in. Huh, so that happened. And then on to the next thing. Meanwhile, my friend Danny, who'd been Savannah's friend first but had stayed mine after, with the quiet diplomacy of someone who had assessed the situation and made a private determination, mentioned once, offhandedly, that Savannah was working a lot. Retail management downtown. Long hours. Things hadn't landed the way she'd expected them to. I nodded, asked how Danny was doing. I didn't ask anything else. Here is what I understand now that I didn't understand then. The poolside comment, "You'll never understand the kind of life women like me actually dream about," wasn't an anomaly. It was a conclusion. The last line of an argument that had been happening, quietly, for much longer than I'd been aware of. Looking back, I can trace it further. The first year we were together, it had been different. She'd been drawn to the stability I represented. Not consciously, not cynically, but in the real way that people are drawn to things they feel they've lacked. I was steady. I had a plan. I worked hard and didn't perform having worked hard. That steadiness was the thing she'd been attracted to early on. But steadiness doesn't stay visible. It fades into the background and becomes furniture, and what replaces it, in the foreground, is whatever is loudest. And what was loudest, increasingly, were the signals of a specific kind of life. The luxury markers, the status displays, the people who move through the world with the conspicuous ease of someone spending money they may or may not actually have. I noticed, looking back, when the shift had started. A year and a half in, maybe. She'd started following certain accounts obsessively. Influencers, travel bloggers, people photographed in expensive places. She'd started making comments, small ones at first. "He has a boat. She travels like every month. Can you imagine just living like that?" Comments that seemed casual and became a kind of constant low-frequency signal. I'd heard it, but not listened to it, the way you stop hearing traffic noise after a while. She had friends who'd married money. Not rich exactly, but comfortable in the specific way that allows for certain kinds of lifestyles, vacations, dinners, a particular Instagram grid. She'd started comparing her life to theirs with an intensity that I'd gently tried to address and that she'd gently deflected. I'm not comparing, I'm just saying. But she was comparing. She was constantly, obsessively comparing. What she wanted wasn't bad, in the abstract. She wanted a full life. She wanted to travel, to experience things, to not feel like she was waiting for real life to begin. There's nothing wrong with wanting those things. What she couldn't see, what I think she genuinely couldn't see, was that real life doesn't arrive on someone else's timeline. You build it, quietly, and continuously, and without applause. The people she was comparing herself to weren't living a different quality of life because they'd found the right partner or stumbled into the right zip code. They were living what they'd built. And what looked effortless from the outside almost never is. I was building something. I'd been building something the whole time. She'd looked at the blueprint and decided it wasn't impressive enough. That's the thing I had to sit with. Not that she'd been wrong to want more, but that she'd made her decision based on a fantasy, and she'd made it in the direction of a man who was performing a life rather than living one. I don't think she was a bad person. I don't think she was even a particularly unusual one. I think she was someone who'd been given the impression, by 1,000 messages and images and influencer posts and movie montages, that the right kind of life arrives with the right kind of man, and that if the life isn't arriving, the man is wrong. She'd measured me against Logan, and Logan had looked right. I let go of the anger around month 5, not because I forced it, but because I got busy enough living that I stopped having room for it. Anger takes maintenance. So does grief. And I had things to do. The message came on a Tuesday, in mid-October, nearly a year after the vacation. It was from Marcus, who was back in New York by then, and who kept up with enough mutual acquaintances that he occasionally passed things along when he thought they were relevant. He'd sent a screenshot with a short note. "Thought you should know. Don't do anything with this, just filing it." I opened the screenshot. It was from Danny, who had sent it to Marcus, who had forwarded it to me. Danny had been talking to a friend named Becca, who still knew Savannah peripherally. According to Becca, Savannah had come across my travel profile. Accidentally, apparently. Someone in a group chat had shared one of my photos. Iceland, the Northern Lights, a shot I was genuinely proud of, and she'd clicked through to the account. And then she kept clicking. According to Becca, she'd gone through 2 years of posts. Every trip, every photo. She'd looked at the Portugal pictures and the Japan pictures and the hiking content from Patagonia. She'd found old posts she'd missed when we were together, events I'd attended, projects I'd worked on, the gradual accumulation of a life that had continued and expanded after she'd walked out of it. She'd done this over the course of a lunch break at work. She worked double shifts now, Danny had said, which Becca had confirmed. A retail management position at a store downtown. Long hours, decent pay, but not the life she'd been imagining. Logan had been gone since roughly January. Some issue with finances that turned out to be less complicated entrepreneur and more seriously bad at managing money. There had apparently been other women, which had surfaced messy and public in a way that I had the grace not to feel good about. She'd moved to a smaller apartment. She was fine, not in crisis, just quieter. Smaller, somehow, in the way people get when the life they imagine doesn't materialize and they have to renegotiate with reality. She hadn't sent me a message. She just looked. I sat with the screenshot for a while. I made a cup of coffee. I stood at my kitchen window looking out at the street, and I thought about what I felt. What I felt was very little. Not in a cold way. In a full way. Like someone who has long since reached the other side of something and finds that looking back requires a kind of deliberate effort. I thought about what she must have felt, looking at those photos. The Italy pictures, taken on a gray February morning in a city she'd never been to. The Lisbon rooftop shot that Marcus had taken of me, laughing at something off camera. The Patagonia photos with their genuinely ridiculous landscapes. The quiet, consistent evidence of a life that had been built in the absence of her approval. She had scrolled through 2 years of that. I had never contacted her. Never sent a pointed message or a subtle Instagram story designed to make a point. I hadn't told mutual friends things I knew would get back to her. I had simply lived, with genuine effort, genuine curiosity, genuine gratitude for what the quiet year had made possible, and the record of that living had found her without my help. There is something in that I've thought about a lot. She had stood at that pool and told me I would never understand what she was dreaming about. And she'd been right, in a way. The dream she was describing, the effortless luxury, the status by association, the life that announces itself, I didn't understand it. I didn't want it. What I wanted was what I'd been building, a life that was fully mine, that reflected the choices I'd made from a place of genuine freedom. She'd made her choice too. She'd chosen the dream over the blueprint. I wonder what it was like, standing in that retail store during a double shift, looking at the northern lights on a small phone screen, understanding in full what she'd been looking at and what it meant. I didn't contact her to ask. I didn't contact Logan either, though I knew enough of what had happened to have formed my own conclusions. He'd moved on to somewhere else, another resort, another pool bar, another version of the same performance for a new audience. Men like that are not unusual. They are, in fact, extremely common, and they leave a very recognizable kind of debris. Danny told me, when I asked her directly, that Savannah was not broken. She was working. She was figuring things out. She'd learned something, probably, at a cost she hadn't anticipated. Danny said this without editorial commentary, which is why I trusted her account of it. I told Danny to tell Savannah nothing from me. Not a message. Not a response. Not even acknowledgement that I knew she'd looked. The most honest thing I could give her at this point was continued silence. I thought about reaching out. Once, for about 40 minutes on a Wednesday night, when I'd had a glass of wine too many and the city was loud outside, and I was feeling the particular softness that sometimes comes with distance. I thought about it, and then I thought about what I would say, and I realized I had nothing. Not anger. Not lingering feelings. Not lessons to impart. Nothing that she needed to hear and nothing that I needed to say. So I didn't. I made another cup of coffee. I went to bed. A few weeks later, I was going through my phone at some point on a quiet Sunday afternoon, doing the thing where you clear out old photos you've forgotten about, and I came across a folder I'd archived a long time ago. I opened it. There were photos from the resort. The pool, blue and bright. The view from the balcony. A sunset photo I'd taken on the boat tour, the one where she'd leaned in slightly, and I'd let myself believe we were okay. I scrolled through them slowly. She looked happy in some of them, the way people look happy in vacation photos regardless of what's actually happening. I looked the way I always looked in photos, slightly uncertain that I'm holding my face correctly. I looked at the last one. Just the ocean, no people in it. I'd taken it from the deck of the boat, the water going dark as the sun got low. I remembered standing there, not knowing yet that I would leave in the morning, not knowing any of what would come next. I deleted the folder. All of it. The pool, the balcony view, the boat tour sunset. Gone. Not in bitterness. Not to erase something painful. Just because it was finished, fully and completely, and I had a current camera roll full of northern lights and Lisbon rooftops and hiking trails that looked like the edge of the world. I had things to look at that I'd built myself in the year after she decided I wasn't enough. I scrolled forward through the current photos and stopped on one from Iceland. A friend I'd made on the group tour, a woman named Petra from Stockholm, had taken it when I wasn't paying attention. Just me standing at the edge of a black sand beach, hands in my pockets, looking at the water. I looked like someone with somewhere to be. She spent years chasing a dream she thought was bigger than us. I spent one flight home, choosing a different future. The last thing I ever gave her was silence. It turned out to be permanent.